It's a bow time. It's about time, but like there's a bow tie. I've been waiting almost 3 years for Genshin to do one single thing, and they finally did it. Genshin Impact has finally put a real cat girl in the game. One with real cat ears, one without human ears. I don't understand why we keep doing that. And honestly, I've never been so excited for a character in Genshin Impact. She's also the first free permanent Animo 4-star that we're getting, which means that she sucks. At Constellation 1. Like, she literally pulls enemies in. I don't know what's so hard to understand about that. Lynette has peak side character energy, which is relatable because we're all just side characters in Xiangling's world. And today we're going to be going over Lynette's best build, teams, and whether or not you need Constellations for her. If you like videos like these, consider subscribing to the channel. We're almost at 200K. And with all of that being said, my name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Lynette. As a Lynette enjoyer, you might be saying to yourself, wow, I'd sure hope Lynette does a ton of damage. Her elemental skill feels reminiscent of another fake cat girl on the roster. When you tap it, Lynette will thrust at the enemy, dealing animo damage. That's it, kinda. Lynette is an Ozha character, which should be called Oh Yeah, because it does extra damage. Oh yeah. Please help. Basically, once every 10 seconds, you can proc her Ozha mechanic, which is an extra attack attached to her skill. It's not a ton of damage, but it is a useful mechanic for Fontaine, and you'll end up wanting to throw her in a couple teams to deal with specific enemies. Her hold skill is pretty cool in concept, but I don't really use it often because it doesn't do much different. It's basically your tap skill, except you're using Yelan's skill, except you're slower, and it's actually Kaching's teleport, except you can only mark one enemy to target and the range is shorter. The shadow sign thing doesn't mean a lot until C1. When you hit enemies with her skill, she generates 4 particles, which is really solid, and the cooldown is 12 seconds regardless of tap or hold skill. It also regenerates 25% of her max HP and drains 6% per second after using her skill for 4 seconds, so she can use the Baguette artifact set, but I don't really know why you would. And as for her burst, it's actually one of my favorite parts of her kit. Basically, she summons a hat taunt, which is a little iffy because taunts don't always work in this game, but in my experience, this one has been pretty okay. It deals animo damage and can be infused like Sucrose's burst, and when it's infused, it does extra bonus damage of that element. But what's cool is Lynette's infusion priority is actually different from other animo characters except for Animo MC. For some reason, free characters swirl Cryo before Pyro, before Hydro, before Electro, but there's some neat interactions that we can actually use that for. Ideally, you can use it every rotation, but it costs 70 energy and has an 18-second cooldown, and she'll need a lot of energy recharge to make that happen, which we'll talk about in the build section. Her second passive gives Lynette's burst more damage after infusion, which is just kind of alright, but her first passive makes it so that after you burst, she gives your entire party an attack buff based on the amount of different elements you have in your team. This attack buff is pretty free, and it feels like a discount noblesse where you don't actually have to equip the artifact set, and other than her being cute to look at, this is probably the biggest advantage of running Lynette. Her skill actually has decent scaling, but I'd personally level her burst first, then skill, and if you have C6, you can level her basic attack too. Another tip I have is to try and skill into burst immediately, so that way Lynette is on field to pick up her own energy particles since she has a pretty high cost burst. All in all, she's not as easy value as some of the other animo units, but she's free, and at her worst, she's a swirl support, so she's more than capable of being used in hard content. But with that said, her constellations actually make her a lot better of a character if you have them. So let's talk about those. Most animo characters suck enemies. Kazuha sucks, Jean sucks, and Sucrose even has it in her name.
Sucrose.
Lynette, however, doesn't suck. Well, she can, but in a different way. I don't even remember where I was going with this, to be honest. Basically, Lynette's constellations make her feel a lot better to play. C1, for example, makes it so that when you use her hold skill to mark an enemy with a shadow sign and then hit them, a small suction effect happens. Right, that's where I was going with that. The suck from this constellation is actually pretty strong. The AoE isn't massive, but it's nice to be able to put suck into Lynette's kit so you can suck enemies. C2 increases her burst damage when it's infused by giving her hat extra vivid shots, which is a damage increase, but it's not like extra damage is bad, so I don't really have anything negative to say about this. C3 increases her burst level by 3 for some more damage. And C4, in my opinion, is one of her better constellations since it effectively lets you get some extra energy in a pinch. 70 cost burst is somewhat high, and the extra charge on her skill could be an extra swirl, extra group, extra movement, and extra energy. The only downside is it's on a 12-second cooldown, so odds are after you use it for the first time, you probably won't see it again, or at least very often in Abyss. The C5 is a skill level increase, and C6 is actually a game changer for Lynette. Lynette gains a 6-second Animo infusion and Animo damage bonus after using her skill, which lets you play Lynette as an on-field character for swirls. She's no Sucrose when it comes to this, but for those of us hoping for an on-field character, C6 basically lets you do it, and it completely changes her playstyle. In my opinion, since she's an Animo character, she's able to use Viridescent Venera, which basically makes her a decent free support, but C1 makes her feel a lot better to play. You're gonna get C0 for free, and if you're pulling for Linny, you'll probably end up getting C1, which is solid. You don't need to pull for C1 for her, but it does help a lot. C4 is also a nice safety net and pretty comfy, and C6 enables a whole other playstyle and team, so if that's something you're looking for, you'll need C6. She's pretty straightforward to build, and I'll show you that next. With Lynette being a part of a Magician's Act, it's only natural she makes your resin disappear. But if you've been around Genshin for a while, you might be saved. For players below AR45, just go ahead and stock up on as much energy recharge as you can, regardless of the set. For players at AR45 or above, Lynette's best artifact set overall is going to be the same as most other Animo characters. Swirl and Resistant Shred are way too strong, and Viridescent Venera will let her dish out more damage and enable your team to deal high damage themselves. That's it. That's the entire guide. Thanks for watching. You can also use the French set, but like why? For other sets, Instructors can also be okay, since you can swirl on field to give your team the EM bonus, and Noblesse is another great option if you're not using Viridescent. But I highly recommend Viridescent over anything else unless you like hate damage or something. For main stats, it depends on the team, but generally I'd recommend going with Energy Recharge or Attack % Sands, Animo Damage Goblet, and a crit rate or damage circlet, usually leaning towards crit rate. Her multiplier on her skill is actually solid and can dish out a quick hit of damage, and on top of that her burst does a fair bit as well. With that said though, you can always go with Triple Elemental Mastery, and it's another decent option on her, especially with C6 where you can use her as an on-field character in Taser. Like me staying up 72 hours to make 2 videos, Lynette doesn't have a lot of energy. One of Lynette's biggest issues is that since she doesn't have a lot of field time, she doesn't catch a lot of energy particles, and that makes her need a lot of ER. For reference, at C0 in a team with Linny, she needs close to 210% ER with Sac Sword, or 250% with Favonius to be able to burst every single rotation. Basically, unless your substats are all energy recharge, you're gonna need ER Sands. In Taser though, at C6, she can get away with Elemental Mastery Sands because she's on field and she's going to be picking up a ton of particles. To make Taser actually effective, she'll need to use Sac Sword to give her 2 skills during that time, which I'll talk about in the next 2 sections. For substats, you want Energy Recharge up to 250% with Favonius or 210% with Sacrificial. If neither of those are generating extra energy, I would literally just stack as much ER as possible. Generally, crit rate is good if you're using Favonius, but otherwise all crit stats, attack %, and EM are going to be good. Real quick, here's a build summary for Lynette, and hopefully this helps you kind of visualize what you're looking for. It's out of character for the French to actually use weapons instead of giving up, but real quick, I want to go over Lynette's best weapon options. Easily Lynette's best weapon is going to be Sacrificial Sword. The thing is, she actually has decent scaling on her skill, and Sacrificial Sword lets you skill with her twice and gives her a ton more energy. If you have Constellation 1 on her, you can suck enemies twice, which is 2 suck, which is Pog. Sorry, I don't know what came over me. Sacrificial Sword also allows you to play her on field as a Taser driver at C6, since you can get up to 12 seconds of Animo infusion before swapping. Sacrificial is too good of a weapon for her. Her other most solid option is going to be Favj, which generates particles on crit. Because she's so energy hungry and isn't funneling particles to the rest of the team, Sac Sword is going to be a little bit better, but Fav can be a good runner-up for trying to fix her energy issues. Outside of those two, the new, how the f do you say that? French Pipe of the French is a great free-to-play option for Lynette if you have nothing else. In total at R5, you can basically have around 77% energy recharge while you're picking up her skill particles, which massively helps her energy issues. Outside of those, other weapons with energy recharge are going to be your best bet. I wouldn't recommend stepping outside of those unless you've got a really specific team comp that's meant to feed her energy, which I could talk about in the team section, but odds are it's gonna suck. Speaking of teams though, let's talk about how you put Lynette into teams. Yo, this background thing is kind of sick. For Lynette's team building, honestly, it's not very different from your other Anemo characters, like at all. Because she has that passive that basically gives your entire team an attack buff for having multiple elements, she's actually pretty good in a lot of different reaction-based teams. But the first one that I want to talk about is obviously the one that everyone's going to be hype about, which is going to be the Liney team, or Linny. I keep calling him Liney because that makes the most sense in my head, but I had to like change it for the guide. So now I will be honest, this isn't like the most ideal pairing because there's other characters that can make this team better, like Kazuha can do a better job. But because Lynette can shred by resistance, that's going to help out Xiangling and Linny. And on top of that, Lynette also has a taunt built into her kit. Linny has taunts as well. The Grim Malkin Cat can taunt nearby opponents, you know, that whole thing. Lynette can also taunt opponents with her burst, and between the two taunts on these characters, you actually are fairly safe. There's going to be times where enemies just don't give a shit about the taunts and they come after you, but with both these characters, it can be pretty good. The only downside is that with Lynette here, you're only getting 2 stacks of the attack buff as opposed to other teams where you would actually get more because there's more elemental coverage. But this is the one that I think a lot of people are going to try to play because these two actually do synergize somewhat well, and it's a pretty good team. Now, if that isn't enough taunt for you, you can go ahead and swap out Xiangling for Dia. It is a significant damage loss. It is a massive damage loss to do this, but you can do it just to make it so that if you happen to not taunt enemies, you can still prevent yourself from getting staggered too hard, or you could always just run Zhongli, which will give you a slightly bigger attack buff, but it will lower your damage by a lot. So this team is a little bit controversial because it's pretty hard to swirl Electro in an aggravate team. Like, it can actually be hard to make that work consistently, and Lynette honestly doesn't have that many opportunities to actually swirl while she's on field to proc VV. But with that said, it is possible to do, and by swirling Electro, you're going to effectively be buffing Fischl and Kaching in this team, and both these characters are going to do a lot of damage with aggravate, and then Yaya is going to be there to heal. And this is another team option you have, though like I said, it is a little bit hard to swirl Electro, so it's just something to keep in mind. Now, once you have Lynette at C6, you can actually run her in a taser team like this. And I actually really enjoyed playing this team because you can actually use Lynette on field. I always love when we have a new character that we can bring to on-field teams, or bring on-field to teams, you know what I mean. And this is your standard taser comp. You have Xingqiu, Fischl, Beidou, and Lynette. Lynette at C6 gets 6 seconds of Anemo infusion for every skill she uses, and if you use her with Sacrificial Sword, she can get 12 seconds of Anemo uptime and just constantly be swirling all of these wonderful elements around. Now, the downside of this is if you don't have Sacrificial Sword, this team doesn't work nearly as well. Her skill cooldown is 12 seconds, and she does get the extra charge with her Constellation, but because of how having multiple charges on a skill actually works in this game, you won't be able to always have both skills ready, and that's why Sacrificial Sword is so useful, because you'll be able to just recharge one of those skills immediately and then use the second one 6 seconds later, and it lets you basically keep up and eventually get that extra charge of skill use. Now, one thing you can actually do here is swap out Xingqiu for Yelan. Something that I found when I was testing this is that Xingqiu usually has 1 or 2 seconds left before you can even use his skill again by the time you're ready to move on. And for that reason, Yelan can actually be a little bit better in terms of getting a perfect timed rotation. Or easy, maybe not better, but easier to use. The one thing that Xingqiu provides that Yelan doesn't is healing and that damage reduction. And combined with Beidou's shield, that does make it so you don't take nearly as much damage. And that's part of what makes Taser so good. So subbing out Xingqiu for Yelan could be kind of tough there. But you could also, if you were in like single target or something, you could actually sub out Beidou for Xingqiu or Yelan, and you could run double Hydro here, and this would also be pretty solid, deal a lot of high single target damage, and like I said, because you have C6, you're basically just using a taser team. So this next bit isn't really a team, it's just a bunch of characters that Lynette can also work with, because earlier I mentioned that Lynette has a taunt and that she works well with Linny because of it, because you can take the attention off of Linny, the charge shot user. Well, these are some other characters that could actually take advantage of that taunt. One is going to be Melt's Ganyu. Now you can run an Anemo character with Melt's Ganyu, and hopefully the taunt is going to be enough. It's probably not, because you know taunts are finicky in this game, but if Linny is getting benefit from the taunt, then Ganyu will likely as well. And then Klee also has a very precise combo in order to maximize her damage, and not a lot of people are able to take advantage of that unless they use something like a shield or damage reduction. And then here we have Tainari. I felt like Aloy was a good comparison because she doesn't exist in this game, and neither does this guy on my 50-50 losses. But yeah, just having characters that like could benefit from not getting interrupted mid-combo, Lynette is going to be helpful for that. And on the topic of Ganyu, freeze characters and freeze teams in general, they can always use an Anemo character. Kazuha has always been really good with freeze, so a lot of people opt for Kazuha, but you know, if you don't have Kazuha, if you're just looking for an Anemo character to use, and if you need someone for your freeze team like that with Ayaka or something, Lynette can be pretty good. And then this other team is like pretty cope, but it's fun if you really want to use Rosaria. You need a ton of energy recharge in Xiangling and Rosaria to make this team work, but because Lynette prioritizes Cryo over Pyro, a lot of times, even if you use Lynette's burst against something that has Pyro on them, if there's another enemy that has Cryo near them that touches Lynette's burst, it's going to prioritize Cryo, and then you're going to basically have an easier time getting even more Cryo uptime. If you use Rosaria's skill and then Lynette's burst, and then go into Bennett EQ, Xiangling EQ, Rosaria EQ, and you just keep kind of rotating and going through this combination of skills, and then go back to Lynette's burst and try to get that Cryo infusion again, you're going to be able to melt and reverse melt a lot, and it's going to be great. Not really a top team, but it's just a team that you can use. Other than that, you really can just throw Lynette in any team. There would be another Animo character. Like I said, she's not going to give the damage bonus that Kazuha has. She's not going to have the grouping that Venti has. She's not going to have the healing that Jean has, but she is a free-to-play Animo unit, and she's pretty dang cool, so you could just throw her at anything. Honestly, I am a little disappointed that her grouping is locked behind C1, but if you do have C1, she does feel like a pretty good character, and she's definitely usable. It's hard to make a Viridescent user not good. So thanks for watching, everyone, and let me know let me know who your favorite cat girl is. And there's only one answer.